as a brown bag. For anyone watching, we have both planning commissioners and city commissioners. A large percentage of people are online, virtual. We have a number of staff members online as well. But just to kind of kick this started, we are joined today by Lisa Weiss Consulting, Lisa Weiss, Catherine Slama, and Adam. I'm not going to pronounce Adam's last name. I'll let him introduce himself. And but Lisa Weiss's consulting group started working with the city of Fargo back about this time last year, where we started the Land Development Code diagnostic. And the goal of this was to, I'll let Catherine introduce kind of where we've been and where we're going and where we're at. But we're at a pivotal point right now where we could use your weigh-in on next steps as we choose some alternatives on directions on based on the findings from the Land Development Code diagnostic report that was done this past summer, June 2020, and looking at different metrics, then making a recommendation on what the city of Fargo does next. And so with that, I'm going to introduce Catherine. She'll be presenting this virtually and from online. I'm just here to troubleshoot and then here to help with any questions that might come through the process. So Catherine, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Nicole. We are very happy to be here. I'm actually going to first hand it off to Lisa Weiss, who is going to do the first part of the presentation.
Okay.
And I'll just
loading this here.
Sorry, I'm just going to introduce. I think we've got some background noise, so we're going to ask. As a reminder, I'll keep probably chiming in with a large number of people on the call. Just remember to mute your mics. Sorry, Lisa, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Nicole. It's great to be here. I'm Lisa Weiss. We have Catherine Slama, Adam Pisarkowicz, and Roger Eastman from our office on the line. Good afternoon, Mayor, City Commissioners, Planning Commissioners, members of the public. We're really pleased to be here at this milestone. As Nicole said, really the purpose of the meeting is to check in with the group. Review the diagnostic report findings. We'll cover those at a high level, but really talk about next steps. Where does the city go from here? A lot of information has been collected over the past year. We have a lot of good input from the community, and we're looking for feedback from you on that input and direction on next steps. So our agenda is, I'm going to go over the project background, as you'll see on the next slide. And then Catherine Slama is going to go over the alternatives, or really the direction we're looking for today. And then we have a few discussion questions. And it might be helpful if you start thinking about these now, thinking about the findings of the report. Do they reflect your understanding of what's going on in the community? What are the objectives of the LDC update? And then how do we move forward? So that's really the meat of the meeting. Just as a little background, we just did want to talk about the Land Development Code. What is it? It is a Title 20 of your Muni Code. It's one component of the city's Muni Code. It regulates development all over the city with zoning and development standards. It has allowed uses, and it has a whole procedural section. How do you get permitted, and what are the permit requirements? It's one of the key tools to implement your comp plan, Go 2030. Which really is the guiding document for the city in terms of growth and development. So if we're thinking about the Land Development Code, it's really important because it's helping you to achieve that vision in your comp plan. And the comp plan has a number of initiatives, as you know, promoting infill, considering economic development, promoting a vibrant economy, a variety of housing types, different development around NDSU. So thinking about all higher quality development around NDSU. So thinking about all those initiatives, how are those accomplished? And one of the key tools to do that is the Land Development Code. And as you've seen in the diagnostic report, the Land Development Code is very out of date. It was done before the comp plan was created, and it hasn't been updated in 20 years, over 20 years. This slide is just an overview of the process. As Nicole said, we've been at this for over a year. We kicked off a little bit over a year ago. Early in the process, we had a number of stakeholder interviews. I think we interviewed almost 25 people, one-on-one and in small groups. We had a planning commission study session at the beginning, and we had a community workshop where we had about 35 people attend that workshop, at least 35 people attended. And all of that information fed into the diagnostic report that we presented to Planning Commission, and we want to talk about a little bit today. From that diagnostic report and those findings of what's working and not working in the comp plan, these alternatives that we want to discuss today were developed. So we want to think about what were the problems identified in the diagnostic report and what are some of the solutions or paths forward for this city to consider. If you go back to the previous slide. So what we want to do, we're just at the alternative phase, this orange bar in the middle. The next step is to really develop a preferred alternative for moving forward and a clear work plan, and that'll happen over the next few months, descending on the discussion today with Planning Commission and City Commission. So the next slide shows the findings from the diagnostic report. Really, the diagnostic report, it's kind of a big word, but it evaluated challenges and issues with the land development code. And really, does the land development code implement the vision and the comp plan? Is it working or not working? Is it easy to use? And we also evaluated potential economic barriers with your current regulatory environment. Thinking about what do you want to achieve and what does economic success look like for the city? And is that possible under your current regulatory system? So all that's sort of bundled up in this diagnostic report. But generally, because the code was written before your comp plan, the land development code really doesn't deliver on a lot of the initiatives and vision in the comp plan. And this can be seen in a number of areas related to parking, infill development, high quality design. But at really the core of the issue is the substantive kind of base standards, the development standards in the code are difficult to build to and difficult to achieve your vision. And what happens then is you have an over-reliance on a negotiated process through COs, PUDs, CUPs, and then to some extent we call this a system that's broken down. It's not operating efficiently and effectively. And people try to go around or are not able to use the current system, so it's a more of a transaction-based system. And as you know, this is very time-consuming and to a large extent unpredictable. So what we're recommending in the diagnostic report is an improvement on best practices and utilization of more best practices related to better procedures and standards that really reflect the desired outcomes and the desired vision. And then finally, the next slide shows just thinking about elements of success when you're thinking about, okay, where does the city go from here? There's a number of things to take into account. Thinking about updating your code. Updating the code is a significant action item for the city. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of dedication. And one of the things to think about is how much change is really the city ready to take on? We work with a number of jurisdictions where honestly, they've tried to accomplish too much at one time. So what are we trying to fix? What are we trying to do? And how much change is the city willing to undertake? Another element of success is really having a clear work plan. What are we doing? Who's doing what? What is the timeline? And that's one of the things in the alternatives report. And then support for the project, and really support for the project at all levels. At the decision makers, City Commission, Planning Commission, staff, and the public, so that not everybody's going to agree, but that the city does have support moving forward with whatever alternative the city selects. And now Catherine's going to dive into the meat of the issues and go over the alternatives.
Great, thank you, Lisa. Following the development of the diagnostic report, the next step in this process was to prepare the alternatives memo, which we're going to really the bulk of what we're talking about today. So the purpose of this memo was to develop 3 realistic alternative approaches to fix or address the issues that were identified in the diagnostic report, to correct the things that potentially could be corrected through the code itself. There may be other things that are identified in Go 2030 that are not implemented through the LDC. But the purpose of this memo is to think about the things that we could potentially fix through an update to the land development code. So each alternative is comprised of the same base elements. This describes what each element does. And each of these three alternatives is then evaluated using a set of common metrics. And the metrics are the same across all alternatives. So we have a base and a point of comparison across the three. And using the metrics as our source of evaluation of the performance and the effectiveness of the various alternatives, we came up with a recommended alternative on an option that the city may want to consider pursuing for next steps for the land development code. Next slide. So the elements are really what the alternatives are made up of. So the meat of the approach is these elements. Each alternative has the same 8 components, and they're listed here on the left. But each element can address these, can be addressed in slightly different ways in each alternative. So for example, all alternatives in one way or another address code format and organization, although they each do this a little differently. So alternative 1, for example, we'll talk about that in a second, but alternative 1 would involve very little change to the format and structure of the land development code as it's written today. Alternative 2 would include some changes and improvements on the format, organization, and structure, but still work within the existing structure of the LDC. So there's not a lot of change. You wouldn't see a lot of reorganization under alternative 2. And alternative 3, in fact, would involve more changes and potentially include a full restructuring and reorganization, and maybe even a renumbering of the land development code as it is today, depending on if that's needed. Next slide. The metrics are how we evaluated and then compare the alternatives against each other. So there's 8 metrics listed here. And the evaluation was done qualitatively by LWC staff, and we came up with a ranking of low, medium, high for each. So we evaluated the cost, compared the cost against each alternative, and we ranked it low, medium, and high. And all of these metrics were ranked equally. So there was no preference given to one metric over the other. They were equally weighted. So we considered the effectiveness equally to the time it takes to complete, the simplicity of the ultimate result, the education needed, et cetera, and evaluated these equally, weighted them equally to develop a preferred alternative. So the next slide. So here you can see how the 3 alternatives compare against 3 of the metrics. These are just 3 sample metrics we pulled out to illustrate how we developed the alternatives and how we evaluated them across the metrics. So alternative 1 is a targeted amendment approach. It's what we consider maybe a low-hanging fruit, things that maybe are more easily accomplished, more simply accomplished, but still have a benefit and an ultimate improvement upon the land development code. But it is focused changes and with clear direction. It involves a lower cost and a shorter timeline than the other 2 alternatives. But because of this, it is also less effective at fixing all of the issues identified in the LDC diagnostic report. Whereas alternative 2 as a middle of the road approach, it builds on and accomplishes all of the improvements called for in alternative 1, but it addresses more issues that are called out in the diagnostic report. It focuses change and improvements in and around the neighborhood core, the downtown, and some key commercial corridors, which then results, because of this, it then would result in and expected to result in a higher cost and a longer timeline to complete than alternative 1. But because it does, it bites off more of the issues that are identified in the diagnostic, it is a little bit more effective. And then alternative 3, similarly, it builds on and includes all of the components of alternatives 1 and alternatives 2, but it addresses most, if not all, of the issues that are called out in the diagnostic report. It includes amendments to the subdivision regulations, as well as improvements to single-family and multifamily development standards outside of the core and the corridors. Because remember, Alternative 2 is really focused around the core and the corridors. Alternative 3 expands the improvements to more parts of the city. And it addresses things that aren't called for in the prior alternatives. So this realistically would require more time, a higher cost than the other two alternatives. So you can see that as the alternatives tackle more of the issues, it's more effective, but the cost and the timeline both increase. Then on the next slide is really an outline of the alternative number 2. Alternative 2 was the recommended alternative using the metrics as our basis of comparison. This alternative incorporates a significant amount of best practices, a hybrid coding using form-based and use-based regulations. It focuses improvements in key areas of the city, building upon recent or in-progress planning efforts like the core neighborhood plan. And then using the metrics, this alternative is fairly effective. It's targeting areas with the biggest opportunity for development and redevelopment, like the downtown, the commercial corridors. But it also has a lower cost comparatively than Alternative 3. It builds upon other items that are working within the structure of the existing land development code. So this alternative does not include redoing things that are working well. You know, there's elements of the code that are currently working well. So this alternative builds upon those instead of having to rewrite things that are going well. And with that, we are now at our discussion point. So next slide. So really what we wanted to do today, and
Catherine, should we take any questions maybe? I don't know if we want to pause here.
Yeah, we're more than happy to answer a couple questions before we go into discussion.
I don't know, Nicole, what, how you want to move from here? Or Mayor?
Yeah, I think within the in-person portion of the meeting, I don't see anybody having any questions at this point in time. Mayor has a question.
So you basically outlined 3 alternatives, and the third one being a comprehensive overhaul. I was kind of under the impression that we were doing a comprehensive overhaul because we were trying to get it right. It hasn't been looked at for 20 years, and we follow a lot of the 2030 recommendations. But I was just curious why we wouldn't have chosen the third alternative, which was a complete overhaul.
Yeah, so let me make sure I'm unmuted. So the reason that at this point we made a recommendation for Alternative 2 was because of the unbiased and the equally weighted evaluation using the metrics, which weighted the effectiveness, the time, the cost, all equal to one another. Thinking about cost, effectiveness, timeline, need for additional resources, and all of the other metrics listed here, our first recommendation was that you may be able to accomplish a significant amount of improvement using Alternative 2. However, this is definitely open for discussion. This is the type of feedback that we are looking for from the City Commission and the Planning Commission this afternoon to get a better sense of ultimately what the city's goals are for moving forward. And from this recommendation, staff and Lisa Weiss Consulting will be going back to make changes, modify a recommendation to come up with a preferred alternative. So this is the first part of the discussion, but this is definitely not the end of where the city can go. The city can definitely push to do more, but we just wanted to make sure that was a conscious and transparent process to getting there.
To some of our commissioners, what we think we have is we have limited land footprint that we can go on. Commissioner Strand and myself now have a diversion that's going in. We know the southern boundaries of the city of Fargo, And we also know the northern boundaries, probably the city of Fargo. And the concern would be is we got to get it right. So I don't know, necessarily what we need to have put in here. We have a governor who doesn't want us to continue to expand south, kind of doesn't want us to grow a lot of our development, and a lot of our development is going south. We just came up with a fantastic way of using a pond in South Fargo to handle the need to have retention ponds throughout our community. And we feel we could have a fantastic neighborhood in that area with bikes and paths and different things like that. So my concern is that we've made the attempt to go to looking at our land code development. Isn't this the time to really look at the best way to grow Fargo? I mean, isn't this, my input would be, I want us to get it right, and whatever resources that takes to get it, I think we have to do it, even if it costs us more and takes more time. But concur with your first part of your discussion, is oftentimes we are directed a little bit about what the public reacts to. So Nicole's team goes out, we come up with a plan, and then we fight about it for 2 months until we finally whittle it down to the plan that people will accept. But if we had a clear code development and said, here's where we're headed, maybe that would say, nope, they wouldn't approve this because it follows all the rules that we have here. And I think sometimes the commissioners, same thing, is we almost have to look at what the development is before we approve it. But the reality is, if we did have a land code development, we wouldn't have that struggle that we have as well. We want some affordable housing, we want this, we want that, then it'll be okay. I think for a developer, that makes it extremely difficult sometimes, whereas if the city knew what it wanted. For instance, we went to Nebraska, Lincoln, Nebraska, and they did a downtown core development. And what they did is they said, we need a hotel here, a bar here, we need this here, we need this there, and whatever developers would apply, and they filled it in. It turned out to be a beautiful downtown. Had a nice amount of walking between places, and you would go to another site as well. So my curiosity, I'll stop here, but if alternative 2 gets us close but not quite there, why wouldn't we want to be there? Why wouldn't we want to go all the way and make sure we get it right? So I'll stop.
If I could do a follow-up question, and I would echo everything that the mayor just said. It just seems like it would not be real wise to do this halfway. But the question I have, and you had made a statement up front that too many communities bite off too much and they're not successful. Can you tell us a little bit more in regards to what caused the problems in trying to do too much?
Sure. This is Lisa Weiss again, and these are all really good questions. I did want to say something about the. It is a significant undertaking, and I think the level of readiness is really important in terms of understanding, how much work you want to take on, and what the alternatives were meant to do was really bookend. I think from a low level of effort to a high level of effort, and there's lots of options in between. So I think. If the city's ready for a 2 or a 2+, or a 3, we have like 1, 2, 3. I think that's part of the conversation today. So I think this is exactly what we want to hear, and obviously we do want to get it right. We we're invested in the success of this project and figuring out the right solution for the city. So what we've seen in other places, for instance, in Austin, Texas. They thought they wanted to do a significant overhaul, but they weren't really ready to do that. The community wasn't ready to do that. They weren't ready to go as far as the city council thought they were in the beginning of the project. So the project slowed down and had to do a significant amount of education and really build up a campaign to get people behind the land development code update there. So I think taking on doing a significant effort is really to some extent, the right thing to do in Fargo. There is a lot of work to be done, but it's just an understanding of, the complexity of a comprehensive update and what needs to go into that. I think is just something to think about really critically and kind of hard in the beginning.
So it was political pushback from the community that caused the problems here?
Political pushback. Yeah, we saw a similar thing in Oklahoma City where staff was ready to go pretty far and they had a comp plan update and they were moving in a certain direction, and then they decided to pull back a little bit because the community, all the community wasn't on board with that. So there's work that can be done, and trying to move the needle as much as possible, I think, is important. But it's just, I think, important to know this moving forward.
If I could do one more follow-up question, was it the development community that pushed back or the overall community?
In Austin, it was a little of both. Like, everybody thought they wanted a lot of change, and then everybody got a little bit scared. In Oklahoma City, it was more the development community. But we've seen other places where it is like the nonprofits, the affordable housing developers. It just depends, I think, on what the issues you're trying to tackle, and where the city wants to go. I also just think education is a big part of what needs to happen, so that a lot of transparency, a lot of education, being really clear about what the problems are and what we're trying to solve goes a long way.
But I would just say on Oklahoma City, I think they had to raise some money is one of the issues that they had, that community. I'd look at Frisco, Texas. That's one of the places we've seen that seemed to have a good land development code and had a nice, they have a robust growth in their community. I'm not quite sure all of what drove it, whether it was a land development code or something else, but they had strict recommendations of how their development grew, and really had some nice community growth in that community that turned out very well. But I'd be curious about that. Austin, I know some of the mayors down there have talked a little bit about some of the struggles that they've had in that community. I could understand that. So, John, you want something?
I don't.
Mr. Mayor, can I say one more thing? This is Lisa Weiss again. There's been a number of cities that have done comprehensive updates. City of Denver is one, very successfully. They did a comp plan, they did a comprehensive update. Big effort for the city, but huge success. And now that it's been a number of years since they did their code, they're going through an update process because nothing's set in amber, nothing's perfect. But that was wildly successful. So I'm not trying to be negative. I'm just trying to be clear. Yeah.
Well, no, I concur with that, but I'm just saying the size of our city, 130,000, and the flexibility our staff has, I do think that in some ways we have some advantages over some cities. And I do think we have the political will right now. Plus, we have the ability to fund some things we probably didn't have before. So I do see that. I mean, I know you have high hurdles, but I think that we would want to look at that. So.
One question from me. John Dunkelman from the Planning Commission. You brought up the use of PUDs, CUPs, and other etc. When you met with the developers that you interviewed in this process, did you get the feeling that they're ready for a rewrite? And my question from the Planning Commission's aspect, if you had a perfect LDC, would everything that came before us be a slam dunk? Or is it always, I know certain projects require more attention, but do you see that the number of PUDs and CUPs and everything else that we've had to work with over the last 20 years being excessive?
So let me unpack that a little bit. So yes, when we interviewed the community over a year ago, we feel like what we heard from the development community is they were ready to revisit PUDs, CUPs, and COs, the transaction-based system. While it's beneficial to some, it is very costly and time-consuming, and the outcome is unpredictable. So I think, that the input we got was to revisit that and try to break it down. It's not clear if we can get rid of all that completely. We work in communities that have hundreds or thousands of PUDs and COs, for instance, or CUPs, and some of that remains, but the goal would be to reduce the number of transaction-based projects and get to a more reasonable number. And in Denver, for instance, they are one city that actually tracked that before and after the code. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but their transaction-based projects, I think they diminished by I want to say 70 or 75%. So that more things went through the normal process, or could comply with the standards, and they didn't have to go through that the transactional process anymore. So that was not eliminated, but it was reduced.
Mayor, is it okay to ask a question? This is Rocky Schneider from the Planning Commission. I think this is a really exciting process. I'm glad to see the update. As John said, Commissioner Gunkelman said, this is something we've waited for on the Planning Commission for a long time, because I think we hear that, it seems like the rule book keeps changing, and every time we get a new development that wants to be flexible, we're not sure how flexible to let them be or not, because we don't have a good rule book to follow. And so I think this is an exciting process. I do want to echo the mayor's concerns about the diversion project has now set sort of the boundary of future Fargo, and the city staff and this process should take a look at our ET area in Fargo and what that means for us to be able to sort of smartly grow into that area, knowing that we have a limited amount of space left. And then also, I guess I'm kind of curious from a consultant side, the length of this process. What do we do in the interim when somebody wants to come in and we see something that looks cool and they want to be flexible, but we know this new rule book's coming out? Does that change what we're doing in the interim?
Well, it depends, but generally the world doesn't stop. You keep operating under the current rule book until we can get the new rules in place. We have seen people do interim regulations to try to, improve things a little bit until you get a better rule book, as you said, which is a good term. But things would keep moving forward. The world wouldn't stop. And an interim set of regulations could be put in place, but that might be just more trouble and more of a diversion than actually just getting a better citywide code in place once and for all.
Thanks, Lisa.
We've seen people do moratoriums, but we wouldn't recommend that. Yeah.
This is John Strand with a quick question. When you're talking the corridors versus the comprehensive approach, how much time and how much additional cost are you talking? Like, are we talking years, or how much more of an effort would that be to get, as the mayor suggested, us to do it right once, completely?
I think there's...
Go ahead, Catherine.
Okay. Catherine with Lisa Weiss Consulting. So I think there's a lot of variables that would determine really the kind of the delta, the change in both time, cost, and resources needed between alternative 2 and 3, depending on how each of those, I guess, projects would be scoped out. Some of the factors that determine the additional cost and timeline is the amount of educational sessions, whether those are workshops with the Planning Commission, City Commission, public workshops, public meetings, training exercises with staff. So the outreach and educational component can really be a significant cost, but also a significant benefit to a project in terms of getting the community support, as Lisa was talking about. So, that is one thing that it's hard to put a number in terms of a dollar amount or, a month or a year difference between the two, because you can have, the amount of code content necessarily wouldn't, I don't think, drive a significant amount of additional time for between, I guess, alternative 2 and alternative 3, because the work can be done pretty efficiently. I think it is the additional amount of public education, commission education, and staff training that may be needed to tackle some of the larger issues, because it would require more public support, because it would be a bigger degree of change. It would require a little bit more staff training, because it might be using some new code tools like form-based code, things that will require some education and training on. And then interdepartmental coordination, which also sometimes takes time, because alternative 3, we are suggesting that's a way to start tackling some of the bigger issues with subdivisions, which again would be require some more coordination, which could add some additional time and cost.
So this is Nicole. Maybe one recommendation. I'm hearing some really great discussion, and there's just kind of three short questions that are, baked into the presentation that Catherine was going to lead. And I think through that, I'm hearing some feedback, at least from the city commissioners here, that maybe some things are missing, maybe in that, like in the metrics part. And I'm wondering if we could jump through those questions real quick to see if that sparks any additional discussion to give us direction. I'm hearing some good things that we can turn into next steps based on this discussion, but I want to go through these questions to see if I'm pulling out correctly.
Yeah, we'd love to jump right in. So we do have a series of 4 questions that we put together with the intent of trying to gather the right type of feedback, and we're already getting a lot of that, but really to direct the conversation away to get us the exact type of information we need to either revise an alternative, make a new recommendation, or kind of piece together elements of each of the alternatives to develop a preferred approach that meets the city's goals. So I think our first question here, maybe we can probably go through pretty quickly, is, do you agree with the findings of the LDC diagnostic report? We really want to make sure that we are moving forward with a common understanding of the issues that we are trying to remedy.
I'm seeing head nodding, so.
Yeah, this is Lisa Weiss too, Nicole. I think it's even if just at the big picture, not all the granular stuff. If you haven't had a chance to go through all the specifics about, this or that, but at a high level in terms of even what's on the slide, doesn't implement the comp plan, over reliance on transactional zoning, those kind of things. I think that's even that level of, agreement is hopeful. Okay.
Exactly. Okay. So I think if we're seeing nods of agreement, we can probably move on to the next discussion question.
I'd just like to ask a little quick question of Nicole and the team. I wasn't around when they did the Go 2030 plan. How dynamic is that, and how alive will that stay? Because we're approaching that 2030. Or is it designed to stay dynamic and alive and flexible and nimble?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it is designed to stay nimble and alive. And I think one of the things that came out of your brown bag from a few weeks ago related to the climate change, I think, per the city commission's discussion there, having a report on that, on, kind of status and where we're at there. But I think you'll find it's pretty general enough that it's fluid. And yeah.
Well, John, I think that's a great question, because Commissioner Williams used to also go always back to Go 2030, Go 2030, Go 2030. But that's not the LDC.
No.
It has broad themes in it, which I think are fine. But when you guys are talking about doing the LDC, this third quote in here, LDC is simple, effective, and user-friendly. I'm not sure it is. I mean, that's what we'd like to get it to be. And when John Gunkelman was talking, yeah, the developers come in, what are the rules, and what are the new rules going to be? If we follow those rules, are you going to give us approval? And I think that's really where we have to go. Clear review process, tell people where they're headed and what's going to go on. And that's why you ask me, what are my major objectives? You can do revisions, but if we have to rewrite it, City of Fargo has changed in 20 years. We're not the same city we were 20 years ago. And to our points too, we know we have limited where we can go or what we can do. And there's a huge debate about density versus, we go to our old neighborhood, we put in density, and they said we don't like apartment buildings. But maybe that's really what you want to put in those places, if you want to have children in the schools or those types of things that we always get into discussions about. But LDC to me is separate from Go 2030. I just always think Go 2030 has themes that work. Walkable, bikeable, we like this, we like that. It has 10 major themes that are in there that are fantastic, but I don't think it defined how you in your LDC.
Right, the
like your
LDC is the how of the Go 2030.
Yep.
And so, for instance, the walkable mixed-use center, to do that today, you need a PUD to do that.
Yep.
And so it's not really a given list of, this is how you do a walkable mixed-use center. That's not in the land, it's not baked into the land development code now. And so that's what we would, that's what's incorporated into these alternatives, is rewrite the land development code so someone could build a walkable mixed-use center by right. So I'm hearing a yes to question number 1.
Okay, sorry, we're having some technical difficulties. I'm going to take over the presentation. We've lost Adam, unfortunately, so give me 1 second. I apologize for the delay. We're going to go to question 2. The second question is, we listed some few objectives. I'm going to pull them up in a minute here. But if the objectives of the project are to implement Go 2030, incorporate best practices, create an LDC that is simple, effective, and user-friendly, ensure a clear review process, and then to streamline approvals for appropriate projects. These are objectives that we developed and crafted based on the findings of the diagnostic report and the goals of this part of the project. So we're looking for some feedback on if the next phase or phases of any sort of LDC update are to incorporate these and to achieve these objectives. If these are the objectives, is there something that's significant of a priority for you guys, or is there something that's missing that we want to make sure the city accomplishes for any future phases of work?
And this is where I would add what I'm hearing today, maybe what's missing from the city commissioners here speaking and Commissioner Gunkelman and Schneider, is the need to add that futuristic, that future vision of, buildable, kind of good planning principles, even strong planning principles related to that future best use of land discussion. There's a way to simplify that, but maybe that future vision isn't maybe baked in here enough to satisfy some of the concerns I'm hearing today.
If I could just add to that. Yeah, making the future development as sustainable economically for the city as possible, which really relates more to what the mayor referred to in regards to the diversion. We have a limited amount of land, and we've got to get the highest value out of that as we can.
This is John Strand again. I'll just ask me questions that might be dumb, okay? And I don't want to assume things. To what degree, when we go down this path, do we partner with like the school districts and the park districts so that all of their strategic plans mirror ours or are reflected in ours, or so we're not overlooking what they've planned?
Yeah, I think one of the things that is maybe mixing into this discussion, which is terrific because this is what we're processing in our department, is we know the Go 2030 needs some aspect of updates and freshening up. We, in the process of doing a core neighborhood plan that will hopefully soon be adopted, and also have a list of recommendations and changes. And then there's, future land use planning and visioning that correlates with the land development code. So I think what I'm hearing is a need to have a broader discussion of how these pieces fall into place with each other and how they sync up with each other. And we can certainly add that to our list and kind of incorporate that into these alternatives, again, as maybe one of the objectives as how they fit together. Does that? Because absolutely, we work closely with parks and schools and land development planning and land use planning, and and with the land development code itself, it doesn't, you know, it only really applies to them as they develop their facilities. However, the vision of how we build our cities, absolutely, they're part of those. They're incorporated into those.
Okay.
So I assume we're yes on the second part, the three of us? Yes.
Okay. So yes, and then we'll make sure to maybe address those other comments regarding flexibility, vitality, and then coordination with other planning efforts as well. In helping shape the recommendation, we, as I mentioned before, we did rely on a set of 8 metrics. So the question for this is, do you agree with the metrics used to determine what the preferred alternative was, or what the preferred alternative is at this point? Or is there anything that's more of a priority than something else? Should any metric be weighted more heavily? And if these are not the right metrics, what else should be considered when evaluating and determining an approach to move forward?
I think the 2 main elements I'd look at is administrative burden, because I want you to know if I need to hire more people in planning. And then the simplicity, user friendliness, I would also focus on that, because we'd like it make it easy for a developer to know what they can build and what can happen. And then I think Arlette also mentioned best value coming out of some of the growth or development, and what is best value. Governor always arguments that a Taco Bell is not as good as 4 different shops in one spot as far as the taxable value of a certain thing that goes into the community. And that's where we've gotten that commercial on first floor, apartments above, or offices, commercial mixed-use development type of thing. So I think that would. And then another one would be timeline to complete, because we have a lot of people that come to us with plans, and how long does it take to get to where they need to get to. I think that's probably Nicole's struggle at times, is what is a clear path. And with Amazon recently here, we were able to timeline complete in 60 days. So I know that can be done, but I think we would like a little bit of that as well.
Okay.
A question I have is with use of the word predictability, does that mean consistency?
So I think that could be a couple of things. The way that we meant it here is predictability in the built result. The simplicity of the code ultimately can also help with the consistency of the regulation. So things that require less interpretation can often be applied more consistently because there are clear regulations. But so that they do kind of go together. Simple standards can be applied consistently with predictable results, because you are using the same set of regulations for projects of a similar scale and a similar nature. It's the negotiated process that breeds and results in lack of simplicity and lack of predictability, because they are continuously being negotiated. So they're interrelated, the simplicity and the predictability. And I will state, if there's not a lot of, if you need more time to think about some of these metrics and think about the path forward, this is not the last time that the consultant team and staff will be presenting this for your consideration. I did want to make that clear. I don't know if we mentioned that in the beginning, but we will be coming back with revisions for further consideration. So there's no reason to feel like if you don't have all of your thoughts really organized at this point, or if you need to see a different version of the alternative before making any sort of decision, that is part of the next steps of this process.
I think we're yes here, but we can work with staff if we have some things that the commissioners think we want to work on or be weighted higher. But I think so far, Arlette, you're okay. John, you're okay? Yeah. You can go to the next then.
Okay, great. And then our last question. So the recommended alternative, which was alternative number 2, does that meet the objectives and contain the elements of a successful project? So if yes, the city would move forward with, potentially move forward with alternative 2. If no, staff and the consultant team can revise, create another alternative, modify in a number of ways to meet the objective, reconsider different elements, reconsider different objectives. We can come back and prepare something else for your consideration.
Commissioner Preston, what do you think?
You know, it would be nice to have probably a little bit more detail in regards to what kind of overall changes we're talking about. And I apologize, I have not been able to get all the way through the report to get a sense of the political pushback and if that was a major issue with success. You know, is that something that we need to think through more clearly? I would tend to go with the full implementation or the full alternative, number 3. But thinking it might be good to have a little more detail about what kind of scale of changes we're talking.
Yeah, I think from a staff's perspective, this has been great discussion today and has given us a lot of help to kind of plan a path forward. I think there might be a version, you know, between a 2 and a 3, 2.5. There might be a 3+. You know, I think just trying to understand that scale of change. And so, yeah, we can work with Lisa Weiss's team to kind of dive in a little deeper. You know, if this is a really good, you know, kind of gut check to then dive in deeper to see what we're actually talking about in more specifics, and give you some more tangible things as it relates to, you know, things that you know, like your budgets and your timelines and the impacts, and put it in that perspective as well.
I'd be curious what the planning commissioners think on this, because I think we all had expectations on this of what's going to come out of this. And if it's a 3 or it's a 2, I think I'd like to have the planning people push that, because to Commissioner Preston's, you know, I don't know the political pushback. I think there's 3 of us that are very excited about this and would like to see it pushed to its max, but I mean, maybe some developers that don't like it or somebody else that doesn't like it, and I don't have that information. When I look at it again, I think that we need to do a successful rewrite of the LDC that will last 50 years. So, and I know it'll be modified every year, but what I'd almost like is a living document that can modify as time goes on to meet the needs of the community. And is there something that we can write that can carry that in there? Because we continue to look at our growth and planning and how things have happened. But boy, we got a lot of stuff that can happen south and north of us. So.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
This is Mary Sherling on the Fargo Planning Commission. I would agree with what you and your other city commissioner there have visited about. This is, I think, long overdue, and the timing is perfect. Just make sure you get it right this time. I wouldn't do it halfway, but Commissioner Preston raises a valid point. What's the difference? And that hasn't really been outlined here. Even when I look at the report, I'm a little uncertain about, you know, are there objectives that would be important that we would be missing here? And I think that's really crucial that you hit all of those things, the upcoming flood protection, the ET areas that Rocky mentioned. You know, it's just the timing couldn't be better to make sure that we can address those before you end up having to figure it out later. If we've got a good a good set of directions. I think it's well worth the time and effort that it would take to do 3, and maybe even you need to do more than that. I don't know, but that would be my 2 cents.
Anybody else from the Planning Commission want to weigh in?
I think one other comment, that it would be easy to do a quick survey. We get, there's probably 3 to 5 developers that we get before us quite often. And I don't think it would take much to poll them to get their thoughts on the idea of the full rewrite. Just to wait to get the, they're the ones that are bringing the bulk of the projects before us. I think it'd be easy to poll them to get their thoughts on it.
Rocky, you got anything?
Nope, I'm excited about this process, and I think doing it right the first time is going to prevent us all from having to come back in a couple of years and do it again.
Commissioner Shirley, the biggest thing I think is the detriment. It's a 24-month versus 12-month, and there's also more expense. But I'm sure the county will pay that extra expense. No, not really.
Hey, I'm speaking as a Fargo Planning Commissioner here.
No, I think it's going to take more time, but even taking more time, we waited this long to get this thing rewritten. So to me, it's, when you look at it, one of the gains it says it makes it's more simple, more efficient, and simpler for our staff. So you kind of say, well, that's a major gain for us, because then it'd take less time to process projects. So there may be some hidden gems that we get, and like Commissioner Preston says, what are the different, where do you weigh the plus and the minus? But if you come up with something simpler for your developers, more efficient, less much of going through 6 months processes that take us to the commission several times and trying to get a neighborhood under, is this okay? Is that okay? Is this okay? Is that okay? No, you have clear directions. So I think, Nicole, you've got some clear discussion of, we really would like to look at a 3, so.
I just have another quick question. I agree with comprehensively approaching this. How much do we look into the unknowns of the future? You know, the changing technologies and the changing transits and you know, all that stuff. How do we be flexible in our future planning, like autonomous flying vehicles, for example, which might be here in 10 years, and we're looking at a 50-year plan. Do we leave room in there to accommodate technology and changes and society and in the world? Or I'm just curious how that fits in here.
Nicole, do you want me to answer that, or do you want to go answer?
I was actually going to call on Lisa. Yes, that's perfect.
So, I mean, that's a fantastic question. We try to be as forward-looking as we can, but we are also taking, we're implementing your comp plan. So we're also using that as direction, some of the other documents you talked about. But you're right, the world is changing rapidly. So we need to take that into account. And in fact, we are working on an international code that is looking at autonomous vehicles, driverless communities, a lot of really forward-looking things that we can also bring to bear and kind of fold into some of the discussions. We don't want to get too far ahead of technology because we don't want to do things that are really impractical right now. It needs to be based in reality. But we do also want to be forward-thinking, sort of bring the best practices and best minds to bear for the city of Fargo.
Okay. If there's no other comments on this, I think then we just wanted to talk real briefly about next steps. So we will go back and, taking all of this feedback into consideration, we will rework the recommended alternative to hit the marks that were called out this afternoon, and add a little bit more detail that is needed to help make a decision. And the next thing is to present this refined alternative to the City Commission, Planning Commission early next year. And then there'll be other steps from there.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. We do have a city website that is really up to date and have all these documents on. So if anybody's watching publicly or if anybody wants easy access, you can just go under the planning department, under the City of Fargo, plans and studies, and then you'll see land development or land development code diagnostic. And then I think thanks for your feedback today. We'll partner up with the Lisa Weiss team and come back with some alternative modifications and more explanation. And so stay tuned for an update based on your feedback. And if anybody from the public wants feedback, I know, Aaron, I think there's a public input process, or we've, kind of gave the Planning Commission a quick update, but I know we'd be open to public feedback as well if anybody wants to send us emails to that degree. Anything else? I think otherwise I think we're done, unless you have any other comments. Yeah. I think we're done.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, great.
Thank you very much.
Great work. Thank you very much. We very much appreciate it. I'm glad you lined our city so much fun to study and figure out a better way. So